Morning, everybody. Don't know if people saw the image that was used to accompany this class. It was a horse with a gift wrap, a horse with a bow, and it has to do with presents from the expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And I think that we may have, that might not be a very Jewish expression. Not because Jews have necessarily a problem with horses, but because Jews may have a problem with gifts. The headline that sparked this conversation or this discussion, one I saw from Rabbi Yitzchak Grossman from the Beis Vad Halacha Center. Source number one, Pope Francis once received a Lamborghini, donated it, and kept driving his Fiat 500. Interesting article. Great headline. Back in November 2017, the late Pope Francis was presented with a brand new Lamborghini Huracan at the Vatican. The Lambo was auctioned off for charity. Back in 2014, the Pope received a Harley Davidson, which had the same fate. It was auctioned off for charity. Would be interesting to see the Pope on a Harley. Maybe interesting to see the Rabbi on a Harley. But so gifts were given, and then they were donated. This idea of the role for gifts, especially as we are in this December season where we are bombarded with lists for gifts, and it's not just the holiday season or Christmas. The lists now are the top 25 Hanukkah gifts. People know that the Hanukkah presents have become very much a cultural thing as well. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But the idea in this gift-giving season, how do we look at gifts? And, spoiler alert, we'll see in source 3 the expression, Sonei matanos yichyeh, one who hates gifts lives. At the same time, being generous and giving gifts would seem like a nice thing. And that got me thinking about the origins of the expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And source number 2, from there's a number of different definitions you could find online, but this one is from the Voice of America's Learning English site. So figure, I imagine some, person sitting in the middle of Asia looking at what it means to look a gift horse in the mouth. So way back in 1546, a man named John Haywood supposedly used this phrase in some Middle English text. However, some word experts say the idiom is much older than that. However old it is, people must have used it when gifting a horse was a common thing. To understand this idiom, we must understand a bit about horses' teeth. They grow over time. So checking the length of the teeth is a way of knowing the horse's age. Although I've never given or received a horse, I'm guessing a young horse makes a better gift than an old horse. However, checking the horse's mouth would be a sign of mistrust towards the gift giver. It would be bad manners, and it might make the giver feel embarrassed or even angry. The polite thing to do is simply to say, thank you, and accept the gift horse graciously. These days, horses are not common gifts, but we commonly use this idiom today. Don't or never look a gift horse in the mouth. Means don't find fault with something that has been received as a gift or a favor. Don't be ungrateful when you receive a present, even if it's not exactly what you wanted. If you complain about a gift someone has given you or a favor someone has done for you, you could be accused of looking a gift horse in the mouth. So that's where it comes from, the idea of being grateful, saying thank you, and not necessarily investigating or thinking it through or analyzing it so much. Maybe the kids' version of it is you get what you get and you don't get upset, right? That's another maybe a parallel expression. So we have this idea of don't look a gift horse in the mouth. We should be grateful for the generosity, for the gifts that we get, and that should be enough. However, we see that in the tradition of Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei and Proverbs, source number 3, Ocher beso botzea botza v'sonei matanos yichyeh. He that is greedy of gain troubles his own house, right? Greed is bad, but he that hates gifts shall live. It's good to hate gifts. You should, not want things. It seems to be Shlomo HaMelech encouraging a more limited, or less fewer things. Keep things focus on what you have. Don't be greedy, and don't even want gifts. Greed is the unhealthy pursuit of possessions, and eschew possessions by even hating gifts. And this idea of this character trait finds expression in various stories in the Talmud. Source number 4, Megillah 28a is an example. It was said about Rabbi Elazar, when they would send him gifts from the house of the Nasi, he would not take them. And when they would invite him, he would not go there. Right? He was in a position that people wanted to give him gifts, and he would refuse, and not only that, he would decline invitations. In keeping this idea, he didn't want to be dependent, reliant, or even receive from other people. In contrast, it was recorded about Rabbi Zera that when they would send him gifts from the house of the Nasi, he would not accept them. But when they would invite him, he would go there. He said, they are honored by my presence, therefore my visiting is not considered like I'm taking a gift from them. So Rabbi Zera had a bit of a different spin. It kind of fits into the expression that I like, that he felt him accepting an invitation and then gaining from whatever he received at the home, the meal, or whatever the experience was. That was not him receiving a gift, that was him giving a gift. It doesn't say you can't give gifts, it just says you have to hate receiving gifts. But he felt, an expression that I like, and it also is appropriate to Hanukkah, he felt that his presence was the present. He felt that him showing up was something that was nice, and it wasn't him getting the free meal as a gift to him, but he was honoring them and showing them kavod or respect or favor by showing up in the first place, by them having, the honored guest, right? It's kind of, he was helping make their event better by his being there. So you have, already this idea, decline the gifts, but we already are seeing this kind of in Rabbi Zera's behavior, that it's not always so straightforward. The Rambam, in discussing the laws of exchange in Zechia Umatana, which is about how you acquire and how you give things over, not only in terms of gifting, but in terms of acquisitions. How do I take my mug and give it to you, make it your property? So that's the idea of Zechia. That's me giving it over to you. How do you receive it? That's Matana. So the Rambam says, perfectly righteous men and women of spiritual stature would not receive gifts from other men. Instead, they would trust in God, blessed be his name, and not in generous men. As Proverbs states, one who hates gifts will live. All right, so the Rambam is not saying it is forbidden. He's talking about a midas chasidus. He's talking about this being elevated type of behavior, being able to decline, wanting this, seeing this as part of the idea of having faith. So the Rambam's comment is, taking forward this verse, is echoed into the halachic literature. The Beit Yosef, the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch all talk about this midat chasidut. It's something to aspire towards, but not necessarily an absolute halacha. Question? No, everyone's okay. All right. So how this then look? How do we look at this in terms of there's certain issues. On the one hand, nice idea. We should be self-reliant, and we should not accept. We should want to rely only on God. Sometimes, giving to someone makes them feel good. Sometimes giving to someone may be an act of tzedakah. How do we look at the interplay in some of these issues? Someone makes you a nice offer. Maybe it's not an offer you can't refuse, but it's an offer that maybe you should refuse. How does that play out? So, source number 6, Rabbi Yitzchak Adarbi, was in the 16th century. And he was asked about a situation. Al Nyan Savas Ruvain Shetziva Machmas Misa Shetadur Achoso Leah Uboneha Me'ayom Hazad Eser Shanim Ritzufos Ba'osa Dira Shehi Boneh Darim Ba'ayom. So he wanted to allow that his sister would be and children would be able to stay in this apartment for 10 years, and they wouldn't have to give up their living where they had been living. So she has the permission, right? Can she live there? But what about the fact, should she pay rent? Meaning she could afford it. Should she graciously accept the offer of this free rent, or maybe, as it says in the third line, right? Maybe she should not want to stay there for free because it's more appropriate, or it's more aspirational to not accept gifts. He says all the time people decline gifts. And so Rabbi Yitzchak Darby is highlighting this idea that it was a genuine halachic religious issue to accept gifts, and says people decline gifts all the time. So this idea of the Sonei Matanos Yichya, of hating gifts, that we should be more reliant, that we should decline gifts, as expressed as a midas hasidus, as a pious act or a type of behavior by the Rambam, and seen as a pious act by standard Jewish law, was in fact, that was the attitude. Sonei Matanos Yichya. So that could be one approach. I think that some of us may feel that, gift giving creates collegiality. It's not about necessarily an impact on accepting gifts is not necessarily an indication of lack of faith. It's not an indication of greed. One may want to say that ma'asim b'chol yom. What's more common every day is people do accept gifts. Obviously, sometimes in politics and government officials, and in cases of bribery, or what's going on in Israel with Bibi Netanyahu's cases against him, right? One of the headlines that keeps coming in is, part of it is you have those who love Bibi or those who hate Bibi. But in terms of the merits of the discussion of the law of the case, gifts were given, but is that by nature, does that necessarily tilt the determination? The case is difficult in terms of what kind of media coverage you got from the owner of the station, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea of, there seems to be that discussion: is receiving gifts, is that automatically bad? Does that automatically make you more prejudiced to the gift giver? Does that make you less reliant on God? It would seem that things may have changed since the 16th century, and in fact, Rabbi Shmuel Rosner, in source number 7, he's writing in late 20th century, Midas Chasidus Shelo Lekabel Matana Mishum Adam, V'hainu Shu Midas Chasidus B'li Yotzei Mehaklal. He says, Midas Chasidus, if you really want to stick with this, then you really should never accept any gifts whatsoever. Afilu Lekabel Meit Tzadikim Ukrovim. You should be declining the gifts from the righteous. Maybe he's referencing the idea of getting like Shirayim or Rebbe dollars. Right, today is 19th of Kislev, a very Hasidic holiday. He says, look, if you really want to follow this Midas Chasidus, it's a level of saintly behavior, not a requirement. But if you really want to, it means don't take any gifts. What is it? Sometimes you say, in lieu of flowers, give a donation. In lieu of gifts, give a donation. That would really be the appropriate line all the time. But then he pivots to a question that was asked about, what about you trying to make a nice gesture towards someone? In the case in point that he references is Elas b'Noam u'Flobinian shenosin chamishin lira l'chodesh levito. Right, so he wants to help out his daughter and son-in-law. He wants to give them some money every month to spend on themselves. And the son-in-law is claiming, no, Sonei Matanos Yichya, I don't want your money. He then says, but if it's a gift that people just exchange among family members, we don't consider this a gift. Right, so it's kind of muddying the water a little bit. On the one hand, if you really want to be Sonei Matanos Yichya, you can't accept any gift whatsoever, even from family, even from the Rebbe. You got to avoid it. But some things aren't gifts. If it's commonly exchanged, it's not considered a gift. If grandparents give their grandchildren $5 when they see them, then that's not a gift. That's just it's almost ma'asim b'chol yom. Almost the way Rabbi Darby said it was pretty common for people to decline gifts. Here we're saying it's people to exchange, show support. That's not considered a gift. It's a very fine distinction. Is it a gift? What's the definition of is or it or gift? Right? It's being very specific in the language, and so we have kind of I'm not so sure we have absolute clarity here. On the one hand, yeah, absolute clarity means take nothing. It's almost like the monks take a vow of poverty, right? You can own nothing. Okay, that will help you ensure that you can fulfill the Sonei Matanos Yicheh, because you accept nothing and own nothing. At the same time, we're also seeing that there's kind of an exception built in for, a situation where it's kind of common, where objects or money is exchanged. That's not necessarily considered something. That's not considered necessarily a gift. And one case that appears in the halachic literature that tries to figure out, is it a gift or is it a mitzvah? Because then I would say that until this point, the expectation is that charity is not a gift; charity is a mitzvah. So on the one hand, being in need of charity isn't necessarily the best, the most enjoyable situation, but that's tzedakah. That's not sonei matanos yicheh. So there was a situation where a person was selling a Sefer Torah in order to pay for a wedding, right? Because in general, we don't sell a Sefer Torah, but you can only sell it, if it's to study Torah or to get married. These are considered reasons to sell Sefer Torah. Right? Often, it's on a parallel discussion. They talk about you're never allowed to leave Israel. You're not allowed to leave Israel unless it's to study Torah or to make a living or to get married. It's the discussion in Gemara Ksuvos. So same thing, if you have a Torah scroll, the Torah scrolls, you're not supposed to sell a Torah scroll to, pay for Kiddush or new carpeting in a shul, but you can sell a Torah if it's for other important communal mitzvos and the like. So here the situation was someone was in need of money for a wedding, and he owned a Sefer Torah and was going to sell a Torah to pay for the wedding. So someone was aware of this situation, and he approached the individual and said, "Don't sell the Sefer Torah. I'll give you money. I'll help you out." And the person who was in the need of the finance says, "No, I don't want to take the money because sonei matanos yicheh." So here you have a situation that a Torah scroll, which is not meant to be sold, which can be sold in this situation because it's necessary for another competing mitzvah. We're saying, no, you don't have to sell the Torah scroll. Keep the Torah scroll. Don't sell it, which halachically you don't like to do anyway. But the flip side is receive a gift. So you have a law, you can't sell a Torah scroll except for a mitzvah. So this could be an exception. You have a principle of sonei matanos yicheh, you shouldn't accept gifts, which is more extra credit behavior, midas chasidus. So you have halacha, which can be violated, and you have a principle which shouldn't be violated. So do we tell you don't violate the halacha and violate the principle, or violate the principle and take the exception to the halacha? Right? There's no prohibited activity here. Both behaviors are sanctioned by Judaism. One is an exception because you're selling the Torah for something you can, but it's better not to sell the Torah. And one is it's better not to accept gifts. So which is better here? Right, and that's what's addressed in source number 8, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, 18th century. Right, it had to do with someone who had to sell the Torah to marry. The Asher Echad Yirei Hashem, a wealthy individual said, "No, don't sell the Torah, and I'll give you the money to marry." And the other person says, "No, I don't want to accept the present. Sonei matanos yicheh." So which is it? Should he accept the gift and not sell the Torah? And the Chidah says, "V'nireh," third line, third word, "Devada yikabel hamatana v'lo yimkor sefer Torah." Accept the gift. The Kaimelan the Asur limkor sefer Torah. Ela she'tiro lisa isha. Right. He looks at the situation, the Chidah, and says, "Look, you're not supposed to sell a Torah, but we allow you to sell Torah to get married. Here you have an exit ramp not to sell the Sefer Torah. So since one is more in the realm of law and one is more in the realm of aspirational value, even though you could avoid selling the Sefer, you're not going to violate the law of selling the Sefer Torah. We don't want you to go down that path of the legal exceptions, and instead don't worry so much about the acceptance of the gifts." What about the fact, I want to live, I want to aspire for that type of behavior? b'dor hazev ruba deruba yadam shuta lekablinu b'simcha l'matanos. Right? He says, look, that is zehirus v'alma. It's a nice way of behavior of wanting to refrain. But most people, let's face it, they're ready to stick their hand out to take gifts. Their hands are ready to accept gifts. Here, this idea of what you want to call it musar, you want to call it ethics, you want to call it midas chasidus, right? It's nice that you're worried about that, but you have a law here. Don't sell the Sefer Torah unless you have to. It's almost kind of confusing what the more important religious behavior focus should be on. The focus of religious behavior should be on the laws, what you have to do, and not on what you should aspire to do. And even though you could kind of thread the needle on both here, no, you should recognize that you should be taking more seriously the prohibition against selling a Sefer Torah here. And the idea that sometimes people focus on some of the more aspirational aspects of behavior while ignoring the meat and potatoes of Jewish law. And that's what the Chida says here. And especially because here the individual is willing to be generous and is willing to protect the Sefer Torah from having been sold. These are very mitzvos gedolos. You should accept the money, keep the Sefer Torah, get married, mazel tov to everybody. And an important lesson on priorities is being taught and learned in this case. So it's again, we're not talking about clear-cut violations. We're not talking gross negligence. We're not talking about things extravagance. We're talking about a situation where you have a legal issue and you have kind of a moral ethical issue, not a moral ethical issue that will be violated, but you should aspire to not accept gifts. But the legal issue of not selling a Sefer Torah shouldn't be set aside in this case. In terms of it kind of echoes a little bit the class that I'm giving later today about stringencies, chumras. The idea of sometimes the pursuit for stringencies. One of the things we'll talk about comes from not necessarily being grounded in what you have to do. And there's a comment of the Kuzari that people who know what they have to do generally aren't worried so much. People who aren't sure what they have to do, if they're doing, should they do more, should they not do more, that becomes where the pursuit for stringency sometimes happens. And I think there's a parallel in this case. We have, I want to be sonei matanos yichya, I want to be a tzaddik. And my pursuit of that righteousness sometimes will lead me to ignore the halachic issue. And it's not the most important halachic issue. We have an exception. You're not even going to violate anything if you sell the Torah. If the person in this case sold the Torah and didn't take the money, everybody's still being the best Jew they can be. But the Chida is pointing out a very fine distinction that you have to focus on the legalities and the important rules and regulations more significantly than on the aspirations. And I think that that's something that emerges in a case which, as we've seen, it's a piece of advice from Shlomo HaMelech. It's the behavior of the saintly from the Rambam in the legal approach. And it could be a nice value. It can be printed on signs and the like, and something to aspire to. At the same time, you can't lose sight of what we have to do. Questions, comments? We'll look at a couple other notes.
There's kind of as you've been saying, there's kind of a fine line between tzedakah. There could be a fine line between tzedakah and giving gifts, and especially our Jewish religion, the mitzvos of the Torah encourage us to give. Aside from tzedakah, there's truma, there's maser, there's supporting others that are all the mitzvos of Korban Pesach, where we have to include others. There's kind of a fine line between making sure others have what they need, and the difference between a gift and tzedakah. I guess it's just an interesting
100%. It's everything we're talking about is not meant to dampen enthusiasm of giving. We're trying to dampen the enthusiasm of receiving, and it's interesting that it's that aspect, and we kind of understand it from the, for a little bit the moral ethical perspective where, where Shlomo Melech is coming from. Basically, Shlomo Melech is coming from, you shouldn't be so greedy. You shouldn't be wanting things all of the time. You should be wanting to give things all the time. And I think, certainly the Chidah situation emerges that way. The exception in all of this that Rav Vosner about the father-in-law who wants to give the gift to the family. In general, the giving focus on Judaism, whether it be from a mitzvah obligatory perspective or generosity perspective of tzedakah, and we'll even see sometimes it's a mitzvah to give to make somebody happy, right? And I think that we'll see that further when we talk a little bit about Hanukkah as well. But it's a perfect segue. Source number 9, Rav Sternbuch, was talking about this situation because what about wedding presents, right? Are we going to cancel wedding presents? As it is, we're trying to limit the extravagance. You shouldn't go crazy at weddings. Now we're gonna be the Grinch that stole wedding presents too. So Moshe Sternbuch is addressing this. He's not the only one, and I think that it falls under the basic the rubric, the category of to be misameach chassan v'tal, right? You have a job to make them happy, and just like giving gifts can make people happy, great. You should make them happy. And as with many halachic conversations, he raises this issue that this idea of giving the gift, has to do with you as you said, source number 9. Because you're supposed to, if you benefit, right? The Gemara very famously says you have to be misamech or nekala. You have to make the bride and groom happy. And if you go to a wedding and don't do that, you're not you violated something. It says chamisha kolos. He's talking about you kol sason v'kol simcha kol chason v'kol chala kol misalos chasanim chupasam. Right? This idea if you haven't given them something, you haven't made them happy, you're kind of like the Grinch who stole the wedding joy. You give a present, that's how you make them happy. You should give it to them. You shouldn't give it to the parents. You should make sure that they know you give them a gift. You should give it you should give it straight into their hands, right? The imagery is, the weddings, they have I'm just thinking of the wedding scene in Goodfellas where she's standing with a pillowcase and they're just giving her envelope. She puts them right in the pillow. That's simcha. Not leaving it at the table. Maybe registries online that they can know who gets it. It works that way too. But you have to give it straight to them. Or sheyireh, they have to be able to see it. This is the first. It's really then. It's at the wedding. This is where we aim our simcha that you have to make them happy then. And getting the presents makes them happy. And so then he quotes that he heard about Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, who was known as the Brisker Rav. Right, so. Right, Brisk is that dynasty of Reb Chaim of Brisk. Right, so Reb Chaim had a couple of sons. One was Moshe Soloveitchik, whose son was Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, and one is Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, who moved to Israel and became known in Israel as the Brisker Rav, and that continued that geographic identity into Israel. So he said he heard from the Brisker Rav. They sent a late present. They waited till after Sheva Brachos. Sirev Lakabel, he declined and he sent it back. For the Sheva Brachos, it counts as a wedding present. After Sheva Brachos, after a week, no, it's not adding to the simcha, and better Sonei Matanos Yechid. Not sure he asked his son or his son-in-law or what they thought of the matter, but it's kind of, sometimes you talk about what's the time frame? Is it, a month? Is it a year? Ein Sof, infinite, right? So it seems that this idea of wedding gifts, like other gifts, have religious value and religious significance as well, like being misameach, to add joy to the chassan and kala. However, there's a limit, and for the Brisker Rav, it was a week. Rabbi Sternbuch is not saying that this is his opinion, but he's just pointing out, you see that fine line between religiously motivated gift, that accepting the gift is part of that religious sphere, or Sonei Matanos Yechia kicks in. And I think that we say this often about recognizing this as part of our benching. We say in the in the end of the Ritzei Bracha, "V'noal tatzrichenu Hashem Elokeinu lo lidei matnas basar v'dam." We say we don't want gifts of those who are of flesh and blood. We want kim liyadcham le'apsucha k'dosha v'archava shel nevo shel nikolim liolam veh. We want it to only be reliant on you and not to be humiliated. But you also see here this idea that part of it is going to be emotional, and if the giving of the gifts leads to a positive emotion, we're not necessarily no'al tatzrichenu. We're happy to receive when there's a certain, whether it be religious significance to the gift, that's part of simcha, or part of assistance, or part of joy, or part of a religious celebration, or even positive emotion. The idea is not to be embarrassed, and not to be ashamed, and not to be humiliated. At the same time, when we are able to have the giving, or especially the receiving, as part of something elevational in nature, that's outside of the trend. And look, we live in a much more materialistic society these days than in the past, and that leads to the Yiddish expression in source number 11, right? Instead of Sonei Matanos Yechia, Sheina Matanos Ichyeh. Nice gift for me, yes. So it's kind of in many ways the bounty that we are blessed with in a materialistic way has made it harder. And I think we see that while certain aspirational saintly behavior of not wanting gifts was a common theme, there are the religious exceptions in general, as well as focus on the legalities and not necessarily the niceties and the aspiration. And as we often would say, whether it was one does more, one does less, as one is trying to be Shem Shamayim for the sake of heaven stands out most. So we wouldn't be able to, certainly it is a very Jewish concept not to look a gift horse in the mouth, because we should be grateful. Maybe we shouldn't be wanting the gift, but if it has a certain religious purpose, then it certainly is something that has something positive. But what about Hanukkah presents? So far be it for me to issue a halachic ruling not to give Hanukkah presents. I would probably be run out of office, certainly by the younger generation. But there does seem to be a stronger tradition when it comes to Hanukkah gelt. Not guilt, although guilt and gelt are sometimes connected. And there's an article about this online, that the tradition of giving gifts during Hanukkah, including gelt, was established during the first Maccabean Hanukkah ceremonies. The idea in particular, because one of the things the Jews did upon being victorious over the Assyrian Greeks was to print money. They had their own coins, and that was considered something that helped mark and publicize the victory. And this idea of coinage being connected with Hanukkah spurred the idea of giving gelt. Elio Kitov, who famously writes the book of Our Heritage, source number 13, it's been customary in many Jewish communities to focus public concern on Hanukkah matters affecting the education of the children. Community officials would gather to discuss methods to enhance the study of Torah among the children, as well as in the community as a whole. For the Hebrew root of the word Hanukkah is chinuch, connotes education, inauguration. The essence of Jewish education is teaching Torah to children. For this reason, it's traditional for fathers to give Hanukkah gelt to their children, as if to say, these gifts are given to you today, so you will accept the yoke of Torah forever. Sounds a little bit like a bribe, and maybe we should just call it an incentive. But it's the idea of wanting to enhance people's attention and focus on chinuch by giving them a reward. It was not Hanukkah time, but usually the last day of school, in the younger grades where they gave out the report cards, the first stop for me and siblings was the toy store, right? Another job a year well done, hopefully. And that was the idea of incentive. So Hanukkah, chinuch, Hanukkah, which part of the way of celebrating the victory of Hanukkah involved coinage and currency. It's not that long not that big a jump towards focus on education and incentivizing our children to do better. In fact, in some Hasidic communities, the night for giving Hanukkah gelt was always the fifth night of Hanukkah. And that's because the fifth night of Hanukkah can never fall on Shabbos. That's just the way the calendar works out. And so therefore, everyone knew fifth night of Hanukkah is gelt night, because that's no matter what, it's going to be an opportunity to give it, right? If Hanukkah falls on Shabbos Hanukkah, you can't really give the gifts because it's Shabbos, you're in a rush, you can't open, you can't, what do you do with the money? These days with Venmo and Zelle, it could be, instantaneous, but I'm not sure they were planning for that. And this idea, that was, referenced before, the idea that, joy in giving and gifts can be connected. Very famously, the Gemara Pesachim talks about the idea of simcha on a holiday. What is considered joy? And the very famous, how do you make people happy? So with wine, and then Rabbi Judah said, make with men what is suitable for them, with women what is suitable for them. Men like wine, and women like clothes. So that's kind of the idea that making people happy by buying them things, has a certain religious component, right? I think back to the discussion of the person who wanted to give his daughter and son-in-law a gift, and they said, well, Soni Matanos Yechia, but no, there's a certain emotional uplift that takes place in giving no gifts. And so, for Hanukkah, whether it be the coinage currency, rewarding or incentivizing education component, and that incentivizing and reward can also be in the form of gift, because we have a tradition that simcha is very personal. Whatever makes people happy is what provides them with simcha. And even though we recognize Hanukkah is not one of the regalim, is not one of the pilgrimage holidays, it's not Pesach, it's not Shavuos, it's not Sukkot, but we as Jews, we generally take whatever opportunities we can to find the reason to celebrate and add to that celebration the physical component. Right? Very famously, as we've spoken about before, Hanukkah is not a time for meals, not a time for food. And if you tell most people that, they'll say, what are you, crazy? Because how many lists of where you can get the best donuts is everyone reading? And what about the latke recipes? So, we're generally not shy of associating a more physical celebration with our commemorations. So the gift giving to the simcha and the joy of the gifts became something as well. I do think that to end where we started, not to look a gift horse in the mouth, being gratitude for the gifts we get and being able to receive and to give is itself a very Jewish concept, while recognizing reliance, self-reliance, faith is another aspiration as well, and some thoughts for this holiday season. In that respect, I'm registered for Hanukkah no, just kidding, but hopefully everyone will be able to give and to receive in a positive, productive manner this Hanukkah season.
Very good.